Some of the panelists are still joining us, and we can slowly start moving our event. Today, this is already the 8th webinar in this series of webinars about recovery, which we are conducting under the support of the European Union, together with our colleagues, Big Recovery Portal. This is the Center of Economic Strategies, the Institute of Economic Research and Political Consultations, and Technologies of Progress. All of us are the members of the RISE Coalition. We are trying to make recovery of Ukraine effective, people-centered, high quality, and we are actually doing the monitoring of what is actually happening, and how the authorities are renovating and rebuilding what has been destroyed. Again, this is the 8th event in this project, and within the framework of this project, we have the website, which is called Big Recovery Portal. Those who have joined us, please look up that website, click around. And today, I apologize, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Maria Rybko. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center of Economic Strategy, and I'm the moderator of today's event, quite traditionally.
From abroad and you want to listen to this event in English, please, you can turn on the English translation in the bottom panel in Zoom. And
in case you want to leave some comments or questions, please do that in the Q&A section. Please leave your questions to speakers, and we will try to answer them. Today, our event will have 3 blocks, 3 sections. First of all, the colleagues will explain what has happened during 1 month in the sphere of renovation and recovery. And in the second block, Oleksandra Betliy will explain what is rebuilt, what we see from the informed sources of data, and then we will talk the discussion of the recovery and rebuilding of housing. We have asked Mykola Boyko, the first deputy head of the state administration, Anastasiia from the charitable fund Right to Protection, who is very much taking care of the IDPs, Alyona Krytsuk from the volunteer initiative Brave Renovators, who are actually renovating and rebuilding those cities and towns who have gone through occupation, as well as the analytical view from the top, some helicopter view from business director of Yilun. That's the serving of renting and sales of real estate, which is following really nicely the trends where they have access. So I suggest we can start, and I would like to ask to take the floor Oleksandra Betliy. I think you are the first part of the presentation who will tell us what has happened in the sphere of recovery. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, exactly. I will start with the rebuilding, and Volodymyr will take on the procurement. So what can we say? Our very regular topic, this regulatory framework. We have looked at the draft law, which is now being discussed. Last week, there was information from the Ministry of Reconstruction, Ministry of Recovery. We are talking about they need to regulate the basic legal, organizational, financial framework for the effective, transparent, and accountable recovery. It is the principles of creating and functioning of the DREAM system. So far, DREAM is not a must for everyone, and to have more projects in it, we have to make it mandatory. Also, from the very important, and we will also talk about it in the housing section, the Ministry of Reconstruction launches housing policy reform. Our housing code, it's 10 years younger than the labor code. Actually, labor code is from 72, so it does require a lot of changes. So this change in the housing policy is very much important, given the critical need for the affordable housing. And exactly today's new housing policy has to reply to a lot of actual issues, especially when it comes to social housing, housing for IDPs. It was decided that all projects for the construction of shelters and schools should be submitted through the DREAM system to receive a subvention for this purpose. That is, the Ministry of Education has decided to make it very much transparent. There are some criteria where they would allocate funds for these shelters, but we can see that DREAM is being used in some special projects. So I very much encourage you to get to know what exactly that is. So the state budget for 2024 provides 2.5 billion for a subvention from the state budget to local budgets for the arrangement of safe conditions in institutions. Hopefully this will be all transparent. Unfortunately, the destruction is taking place. We want to see zeros here, but unfortunately, we see that the destruction of schools, destruction of social and medical infrastructure is growing. That means that we will have increased need in financing this recovery. So we should talk about it at all events, especially abroad, when we're talking about this to our partners, because the destruction keeps not only damaged, but actually destroyed several schools, several medical institutions. So figures are really getting really big. DREAM, as I said, still remains an experiment, but throughout the last months, some 1,000 projects were added to the DREAM. Was this also the confirmed funding grows much less. It's actually plus 2.6 billion hryvnia, while the number of projects it's coming much bigger. At the moment, we have 2,030 projects which are being implemented. That's plus 504. Also in the Mykolaiv region, it's not about the number of projects, it's about financing. And that's the water pipeline in the Mykolaiv region, because Mykolaiv is still very much suffering because of the pipeline, which was destroyed 2 years ago. It is partially being renovated, but again, some new projects had to be engaged via Kakhovka. Now they have allocated some financing. The rest, it's education, it's private shelters, also in the Kharkiv Oblast. Also, they're starting to build a lot of bunkers, because it's very important right now to build these shelters so we would have access to education, because educational institutions can continue to work in shelters, and children need to be brought offline, even in those territories, even in territories where it's still not easy. The content of many projects still remains quite low. This information which is explaining the project, it has actually grown. That's quite positive from the point of view that we have more information which we can analyze in DREAM. And also it's important to mention that that means that more or less our authorities are learning to do this, and therefore we have more information coming out. Some 200 million hryvnia over the past months were directed for the renovation projects from the state budgets. These are various projects, including the majority of the fund. This was the money went to education. Regarding the questions which we are still discussing, it's how we should use this 20% of grant support, 20% grant from the support from the Ukraine facility, in which way it will be directed to recovery and reconstruction on the ground, because it is mentioned in the Ukraine facility that 20% of the money, that's 1 billion euro throughout the upcoming 4 years, should be allocated for the projects of recovery on the ground. So far, the mechanism is not yet finalized. It will be still discussed. Most importantly, that this mechanism would meet the principle of prioritization, and the recovery should be according to the principle build back better. With this, I would like to pass the floor to Volodymyr. Good afternoon. Allow me to share my presentation. So, in the framework of our today's event, we are making the analysis of construction procurement, and it's important to mention that this year is not an exclusion. Like last year, the procurement is growing from the minimum indicators that were in the beginning of the year. Gradually, they are growing with this year unrolling. So we can already make some summary of the first quarter. It was announced more than 20,000 construction procurements. Once again, not always the construction procurements are for recovery, but mostly they are. So of these, 91% were completed, 5 failed or were cancelled, and 4 are still ongoing. That's okay, that's normal, because very often procurement takes 2-3 weeks. Therefore, in some cases, it can last even for several months. Therefore, not all the procurements which were announced in March are finalized. And in March, it was announced quite a lot. Out of 52 billion hryvnia from the procurement of the first quarter, March amounted almost 30 billion hryvnia, which is 57% of all procurement in the first quarter. Defense procurement in the first quarter amounted to 17.9 billion. This is up 34% of the total amount of a construction procurement. And that's where I have to announce that this defense procurement, this is the term, not just procurement which is connected with the recovery. It also means that this procurement have a limited access to information, and we don't possess information about the gist of such procurement and the performance, but this category embraces all procurement that help the defense. Part of the procurement is connected with the protection of objects of critical energy infrastructure. It is coming separately as a separate article. As before, majority of procurement are made without the use of electronic procedures. They are used mostly when it is a must for organizers, for tender organizers, when it's legal requirements, although the majority of the procurement are done without the electronic procedure, still the significant part of the procurement, expensive procurement, is also going through the electronic procedures. That is, open tenders accounted for 40% of the total value of contracts. Defense procurement amounted to 34%, and basic procurement without the use of electronic system accounted for 25%. There are some other procedures, but they're losing share, and altogether they were only 1% of all procurement. If we look at the structure, what changes took place. In March, we can see dark violet, the organizers who are in top in March. Among organizers, we have received new players such as Ukrenergo, and the winner was Elitbud, who will be doing the job for Ukrenergo. Also, slowly, we are getting departments of recovery, agencies of recovery. This is a tendency that will be increasing until the end of the year, and top 10 organizers account for more than half of the volume of tenders in the quarter, and top 10 winners account for only 25%. Again, that's because we don't see the defense procurement, because if we add 34, then yes, then that would account for 60% of all procurements. This is the production construction for Ukrenergo. That's the biggest share in the first quarter. Also, a lot of other works related to operational maintenance of public roads. In the Odessa Oblast, Odessa Oblast is actually a leader for this type of services and works. And the procurement of February through March in fortification at the Rivne regional administration, it's also a priority, and we can see that the number of procurements is growing, and next month we will see another picture, I'm sure. Slowly and slowly, we have received an increase in the number of procurements. We don't see any negative tendencies. We can see that the competitiveness of procurement is increasing. More than 57% is going with one participant. Actually, it's 55.7% in the first quarter. But if we look at the tendency in March, it's exactly 55.7. That's already the competitive procurement. Is this a tendency? Have we really changed the trend, or if it's just a one-time phenomenon, we will check around in the future. We can say that the share of competitive procurement in total procurement increased. There was one procurement with 13 participants. This was a record. Also, the number of qualifications and the negative procedures remains in general in quite acceptable levels from 2,886 procurements, disqualified some 8%, and the number of complaints is still even less, and constitutes, even if we take only the competitive procurement, in any case, the number of complaints is several percent. So what we want to pay attention to, and there's a lot of attention to it in the media, to these processes, what I wanted to say, that very usually that media is giving more attention to some negative processes. They detect violations, but that should not create this negative feeling around it, that this recovery, that it should be associated only with the negative manifestations, because, of course, as we said, competitive procurement is just one of our targets. We really want that our procurement really would become competitive. Nevertheless, so far, the media is concentrated exactly on those cases where something went wrong. Therefore, I mean, in the last months, such cases were connected that the law enforcement officials either started some cases or completed some cases, or the courts ruled. Some cases are really turning attention, the media, from one month to another month, and the media are providing updates on the fresh news. Apart from that, we have information how illegally, in the opinion of media, that one or several participants were not allowed to tender, although they would propose the lowest price, and without any basis they were refused. Also, we see some other tendency. We said that apart from some specialized media, like for instance Nashi Groshi, Slidstvo Info, who are actually specializing on this, there is a huge attention to it from some regional media. Now it's a different tendency that we see over the last months. The overall political, economical media, such as Ekonomiczna Pravda, Suspilne, NV, they're also joining the monitoring of these processes. We will be following the development. We have the idea how to improve the monitoring, so we can find more information once these events are interesting. Thank you so much, and I'm passing the floor to my colleagues. Thank you, Volodymyr. And then we come to Oleksandra Betliy, who will exactly say what she managed to find out in terms of how the reconstruction of housing is taking place. That's a special topic of our months. Every month within the framework of our monitoring, we're trying to pick up one actual topic and to really make a wider presentation of it. Again, all the presentations can be downloaded and can be looked up at brp.org.ua. In the section Analytics, there is this special section where we upload all the presentations, and we really hope that you can read them. Therefore, Oleksandra, the floor is yours. Thank you. I would like to slightly correct. We actually have quite a lot of guests. It's not only me who will be talking about this. I actually want our guests and speakers share their view, but I want to set up some framework. When we talk about the housing, we really have big problems because 20% of the housing stock is either damaged or destroyed. That says that 2,000 multi-story buildings were damaged with the level of destruction of more than 50%. It's 5,000. If we talk about the private houses, it's 166,000, and 72,000 of them, it's more than 50% of damage. So it's huge, huge figures. As a result, some more than 2 million households are affected from such damage or destruction as the consequence of the war, and the cumulative losses of the residential sector, in accordance with the report of the World Bank, are actually $56 billion. The estimated need for housing sector reconstruction is $80 billion in 2024-2033, and that partially at the expense that we want to reconstruct. We want to reconstruct using the principle build back better. For 2024, the urgent need is $2.1 billion. That's more than what we have in total allocated for recovery. So the money is very much missing. We'll talk more about it. Ministry of Reconstruction is the policy making in the field of housing policy and reconstruction. Who is rebuilding? Rebuilding basically everybody who can do this. It's really a common effort. This is the recovery agency. That's the bodies of local governance, regional military organizations, non-governmental organizations, private owners, private companies. So really, we have really a great range of those who are engaged in this issue and who need to coordinate. The funding is coming also from various sources such as state and local budgets, funds from donors and INGs, both from IFIs and individual foundations, United 24, also the Buffett Foundation. Actually, United 24 funds are coming through the state budget, but actually this is again donors. It's coming for separate houses, funds from charitable organizations, private financing of homeowners. We know cases, and remember we discussed it last time when we have received the update how they could reconstruct the multi-story apartment house where exactly the homeowners using their own funds started to do this, and then they engage other financing. Unfortunately, there is a lack of housing reconstruction policy. Yes, the discussions have already begun. The question is quite difficult in which way we should approach this, but again, very important that the Ministry of Reconstruction, together with the Committee of Verkhovna Rada, they have already started the discussion of the housing reconstruction policy. There is the draft law on the basic principles of housing policy, which is underway. Now, the share of social housing in Ukraine is critically low, which reduces the authorities' ability to help IDPs. But also, it is also mentioned that the discussions that have taken place say that the model will remain as it is. So we are targeting the owners. We will be the owners of this housing, but this is initiatives and projects exactly to build social housing in Ukraine. First, it will be a small share compared to other countries of the European Union, but yes, the social housing will be built. That's very important for Ukraine to make sure we can give assistance to the ones who need it and to give such housing. So as a result, the main priorities of housing policy, according to the draft law, it is preventing and solving the problem of homelessness, formation, filling, accounting, and efficient use of housing funds to provide people with housing, because there is some housing which is empty. It's transparency of lease relations, and it's important that the civil society would also be engaged to formation of the housing policy. Actually, rebuilding housing, that's one of the most priority issues for the state. E-restoration is a compensation program for damaged and destroyed housing. It has partially changed. It transformed throughout the last year. It has expanded. For the owners of private housing, they can apply via DIA or the SNAPS, and this was the fund of liquidation of consequences of armed aggression. Now it is implemented with the help of World Bank HOPE program, and the government has agreed on the second tranche of this program, so the e-recovery should be fine. If we talk about limitations, and I'm sure our speakers will talk about it, there is a lack of contractors in some regions because under this program, the compensation can be used for windows or for some works, repair works at home in case that there is a certain list of the service providers. So if the contractors who are doing these services, they are not in the region, that's a big problem. It is not applied to occupied territories. It's much wider there. If we talk about the compensation for damaged houses, the total payout is 5.5 billion hryvnia. It has grown by 0.6 billion a month ago, but we have 86,000 applications, while the OK was given only to 52.2 thousand applications. So the number of such applicants is growing. The second part of the program for compensation is what we call the certificates. That's the compensation for a completely destroyed housing. And as at 23rd of April, we had information recently, 12.8 thousand applications were filed to compensate for the lost housing. 5.8 thousand certificates are already issued. The total compensation amount equals 10 billion. So altogether, the total amount of compensation from the budget for damaged and destroyed housing has totaled 15.5 billion hryvnia. That's quite a big amount, and we can see using the data that this is just a small share of the ones who need it. It actually pertains to those territories which are not occupied. Another program which is connected to the reconstruction of housing, that's Renovate House, that's the Energy Efficiency Fund program. It is given to the OSBB. It's for OSBB means condominiums. The total amount is around 8 million hryvnia in two tranches. The limitations are meant only for condominiums, and again, except for settlement under occupation, there are no authorities on the contact line. They must be a certain way away from the front line, and we have really authorities there because it's very important for the efficiency program. The Energy Efficiency Fund is expecting additional financing from donors, so this program will be financed at the expense of international financial organizations. Still another program which pertains to housing. It's not about recovery, but it really provides access to housing. EASERI is a state program of preferential mortgage lending aimed at providing affordable housing for some total of 14 billion hryvnia. People are receiving mortgages, and the state is partially financing the rate that pertains to various categories of citizens. Mass mortgage is at 7% per annum, and the IDPs have the right to receive that. We do have, again, certain limitations. The person should not have own housing, other housing. I mean, that's understandable. The housing is not in the hostility zone, and the person is not on the sanctions list. That's very much clear why these limitations are. Another project, it's what we call the comprehensive reconstruction projects, which are engaged by the reconstruction agency. The government has made a decision to rebuild 5 settlements: Ягідне, Бородянка, Посад Покровське, Тростянець. So more or less it depends on the type of settlement which we say, but the idea is that to really build back comprehensively, have access to social infrastructure, public transport, so people can be traveling, so which means that we are rebuilding very comprehensively the settlement. These are pilot projects, so the restoration agency has a certain flexibility in which way they are doing various projects. And for us, it was very interesting when we talk about Posad Pokrovsky. It's a private company, Archematica. It actually has developed a project for the reconstruction. So this synergy of private business and the state, the so-called state and public partnership, is very much positive because exactly in reality it allows to rebuild more effectively and to really come up with modern approaches to recovery and rebuilding issues, because again, the state is not always capable to do something else. As usual, the public sector, NGOs, they have lent a hand when we talk about recovery and rebuilding. We have funds, we have NGOs who are doing this renovation and recovery, especially when it comes to some settlements for IDPs. They are also sorting out rubble when there is some destruction. They are helping to freeze some objects until they can be renovated. So if somebody has broken windows and if somebody has money, has the right for compensation, so if the person can't do it, then it's the building is conserved, and then the windows are built, installed. We can see some organizations who are doing, helping the state to rebuild the housing. And actually, we have two organizations today as our speakers. We'll hear from them what are the problems, what are the issues, what are the challenges in the reconstruction. So the areas of work for the future are quite many. Housing policy update. It's again, in which way Ukraine will rebuild housing, what will be the role of social housing and the development of the real estate market. These are really huge, comprehensive questions that deserve a lot of discussion. It's also about deciding where, how, and what to rebuild. Big discussion how to rebuild cities, what role will be played by deoccupied cities, how to give a new life to the cities after the victory. Again, the next is the issue of compensation for lost housing in the temporarily occupied territories. It still remains open. Energy efficient reconstruction is taking place, but some additional standards have to be approved because Europe has already planned the zero-emission housing transition, but it has to be economically feasible for the future, so we need to discuss that. Also, it is important to provide for energy efficiency financing programs in apartment buildings where there are no condominiums. Therefore, the question is still open how to finance this, to finance apartment buildings where there are no condominiums. Because I think a lot of people have refused from these condominium arrangements, but this we somehow need to find a way. And the barrier-free accessibility remains a challenge, not only for apartment buildings, but also within apartments where people with a disability will live.
Дякую дуже, Олександра,
Thank you very
за
much. Thank you very much,
власне
Alexandra, for
таку
this
широку
very
пасками. І
wide
я
picture,
дуже рада зараз перейти до
high level,
наших
and I'm
панелістів,
ready to
поговорити
come
з
to
нашими
our
панелістами.
panelists.
По часу у нас
So
дуже мало
time-wise, we have
часу. Зараз
planned,
залишається 45 хвилин.
we have
Тому можемо
45
всі
minutes
встигнемо
planned.
так по 5
I think
хвилиночок
5 minutes for every
розповісти
speaker to
про
explain
свої справи
about
і,
your
можливо,
cases,
встигнемо
and maybe
також
we can also
відповісти на пару
manage to
запитань.
reply to a few
Першого до
questions.
слова я прошу
So,
Миколу
number
Бойко,
one, I
першого
would like to
заступника
ask
голови
Mykola
Київської
Boyko,
обласної
first
державної
deputy head
адміністрації,
of the
людини,
Kyiv
яка
Oblast
знає, як
administration, the
відбудовувати
person
житло
who
на
knows how
Київщині.
to build back
Наскільки це було важко,
housing
як у цій
in Kyiv
області,
region, how
чого
difficult
треба
this was,
відбудувати,
what
як обирали
was
люди
evaluated, how they
відбудовувати,
chose where
гроші
to
на
rebuild,
відбудову давав,
who gave money for
проводили.
recovery,
Скажіть, будь
who
ласка,
was doing the
як
works.
ви
Please
з
tell us
цим
how you manage all of
Дуже
this.
дякую за запрошення, дякую
Many
за
thanks for the
слова.
invitation. Many thanks for the nice words. Yes, it has been difficult. It is difficult and it will be difficult, but we have to work to make sure that we rebuild everything as soon as possible and to bring people back to their own houses and to social benefits such as education, health protection, etc. Okay, let me say a few words about the Kyiv region. It was quite significantly destroyed. We have 29,145 objects that were damaged. With common effort, it was preliminarily mentioned through the funds and government funds, restoration, and United 24, some presidential programs. We have already rebuilt 17,443 objects. I mean, almost 60% of the works are done, but still I want to say that we renewed with some light damages, where with the effective resource we could really close the issue. Now we have more objects that require more capital expenditures, more resource, and therefore the money that is being allocated. If we talk about the multi-story buildings, it's tens of millions of hryvnia, sometimes it's hundreds of millions of hryvnia that the big multi-story buildings require. If we talk the housing stock in Kyiv, we have 1,722 multi-story buildings. We have already renovated 1,300, which means 400 plus still remain to be renovated with some serious damages. Of course, Kyiv is the region where everybody is coming to us, and we're trying to provide with all administrative resource, and we're accompanying almost by hand every fund, every partner to make sure they can join the recovery. Much is successful. We are trying to engage all resources possible, whatever exists in Ukraine. And today we have United 24, 22 objects are in the progress, and we are leaders in by the number of objects and by the allocated money from the state. Also, restoration, we actually place one or place two in all three stages, which are already launched. We also have some regional programs where we are getting our funds for restoration. Some objects, because, you know, if we talk about private houses, it's 92 houses we rebuilt. We are also the leaders in the energy efficiency fund. We have 91 objects, which we have partially renovated, more than a half, and the process is still ongoing. We have other subventions from the state budget. The state recovery agency is helping in Borodyanka, and more than 10 objects in some other cities, engaging various resources. We place such an objective to make sure that it's very much clear, transparent, that nobody would have any issues. But, you know, during recovery, every object is like a separate story, a separate life. And I need to state that unfortunately there is no single policy for renovation. We can all say nice words that we will be building back better, but those projects which are ongoing, they don't always coincide with those declarations that we make. This project documentation, which is also developed by the design offices, it also leaves much to be desired. We need to adjust every project. And this is connected with the fact that at the moment of the development of the cost estimate documentation, they were not able to enter the apartments, or those who were doing the cost estimates missed something, or sometimes in the period when the state money or the money of international partners, they have already renovated, so part of the works have been done. So we do have some of these problems. We have to adjust the documentation, cost estimate documentation, and we have a lot of challenges when we talk about the multi-story apartment house and you're trying to start to renovate apartments. The people who are homeowners, everybody has their own vision. Somebody wants two sockets, somebody three sockets. Sometimes there are some misunderstandings. But again, we are trying to always find a way out. Also, we have a lot of aspects connected with the contractors. We have the single rule for tender documentation in Kyiv Oblast, and I insist on it. We have the single tender documentation for all participants under any programs, and we have implemented using UNDP. A lot of processes are supported by UNDP, and we are very actively listening and implementing the recommendations from UNDP. And we have found out really good, effective criteria for the choice of participants. Since summer last year, we have the single approach that shall not change. So in this respect, we have found some order finally. When it comes to contractors, very often there are a lot of organizations who are coming with some intentions to do something, but something isn't working in the process like it was meant. Sometimes they're missing employees, sometimes resource, sometimes something else. Moreover, we are clearly following the quality of the works. We don't want to make bad, we want to make high quality, and a lot of organizations are forced to improve what they have done. Sometimes there are some certain delays in time. So sometimes there are missing people because we understand now this is the war in Ukraine, and we have a lot of people, men who are conscripted, and that also, of course, this is also affecting the construction companies. Also, we see a certain problem. But again, in Kyiv, we have decided to step on such a position that we are bringing to people the problems that we have. We're not covering anything. I can clearly, I can come to people, I can come to the community, to journalists, and I can reply any question to any questions related to the reconstruction. We are permanently doing some events, coming to the fields and making a lot of meetings with the contracting organizations to make sure that all people, the parliamentaries, the activists, we encourage any questions, and there is no secret that yes, we do have problems, but any process without any questions, it shall not take place. Nothing is ideal. Every day we face certain difficulties, but again, we never aim to do it just for the sake of doing. We want to be proud of what we are doing. Therefore, the process of recovery is ongoing. Yes, for this year, when it comes to state money, we also have this fund of elimination of the consequences. United 24, some apartment houses are almost over. Also, we're making shelters, bunkers, renovating schools, kindergartens. I can tell you that regarding the objects, schools and kindergartens, from 244 objects, 200 have already been renovated, 44 still remain, 39 are under financing. For 5, we're still searching the financing. But again, we're also working in Kyiv. Every year we're meeting trains from Sumy, from Kharkiv, with the internal displaced people. A lot of donors are helping us. Some funds are buying apartments, making housing for retirees, building housing for internal displaced people. And we are really trying to host IDPs to give them various kinds of support, engaging funds, to make sure it's also a cash assistance, not only housing, but we're permanently searching, and we're trying to find possibility to place people around. The process for recovery is ongoing, and as was mentioned, some 17.5 thousand objects were renovated. We have the Napoleon plans. We are trying. The history will tell what we could do, what we couldn't. In a few words, this is like
Дякую
this.
дуже. Ну, дуже сподіваюся, що історія покаже, що
I
без
hope that the history will show that everything will be
обов'язково.
all right
І
in all
оскільки
aspects.
питання
And
відбудови
because the
житла
question
це
of
не питання
recovery
того,
and
що
rebuilding of
можна
housing,
звести якісь
it's not
квадратні
just a
метри,
question
а
just
для того,
to
щоб переселити
build back
людей,
some
для того,
square
щоб
meters. It's
залишитися
about
без
transferring
над
people who
головою,
are
або
deprived of housing,
в них житло було
or
зруйноване
their
чи
housing was
пошкоджене,
fully
або вже вони діють
destroyed or
з
damaged,
окупованих областей
or they're
чи з
coming from the
регіонів,
occupied
де зараз тривають
regions
бойові дії,
where we have
і
hostilities still.
опинилися в ситуації
So they
внутрішньо
are in the
переміщених осіб.
situation when they
Тому ми
have become
трошки розширили
IDPs.
тему
That's why we
з
have expanded the
суто
topic
такої
from
механічної реконструкції і
purely
відбудови
mechanical reconstruction and recovery
цегли
of
і дошок
bricks
і
and
вікон до
roofs and windows
власне
to
задоволення
really
потреби людей в
satisfying people's
тому, щоб
needs
десь
in making
жити
sure that
і
they would live somewhere,
десь селити свої родини.
place their
Тому ми запросили
families.
Анастасію
That's why we
Бурау.
have
Це
also
благодійний фонд громадянства для
invited
того, щоб люди могли
Anastasiia
займатися
Burau,
питаннями
that's
внутрішньо
right to
переміщених осіб.
protection. I know
Знаєте,
You have done a lot about IDPs, you know about their needs, you have done surveying. Please, could you tell us what is the situation in terms of housing for IDPs and what, in your opinion, can be done? Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. Many thanks for this invitation and thank you for raising this important subject. I represent the Right to Protection charitable fund that helps IDPs, and we also do permanent monitoring of their needs and problems, as well as advocacy of systematic changes in this direction in the area of housing rights for IDPs. In general, we are seeing that the information that we have received from the state authorities, as at 24th of April this year, we have 4.8 million IDPs in Ukraine. Truly, many persons who have been displaced, maybe they didn't register as IDPs. Therefore, we can only imagine that volume of housing needs that we have today. Over this period, we are observing several ways to resolve these housing issues, and at the same time, we are emphasizing on the expansion with the idea to provide for diversified solutions to make sure that IDPs, depending on their personal and financial conditions and needs, could provide themselves with housing in one way or the other that would be more or less acceptable for them. Yes, we are observing that part of the IDPs continues to live in compact places, temporary places. If we take the official data, like for instance, the Ministry of Reintegration, as at the 15th of April this year, says that in Ukraine we have 1,038 places of temporary housing. With this, 20,000 bed places are free for IDPs. From the other side, we have seen that the cluster on CCM management, CCM cluster says, and they are operating about different data. They see more of such objects. It's 2,640 places of temporary residence. This difference is explained that the ministry is using some official lists approved at the level of the oblast and comprise those temporary places of residence that meet minimum requirements, availability of bunkers, etc., etc. From the other hand, we understand that part of these places of compact residence don't meet such requirements, and unfortunately they have challenges in terms of bringing them in line to such new requirements. So in this context, we see the necessity from the one hand of some clarification work with the owners and with the balance holders to make sure that this activity is quite necessary and needed very much in terms of engaging financing for such places of residence. On the other hand, we understand the need to engage donors to make sure we can align the conditions of these residence centers to these minimum conditions. So we welcome the financing that has come. It has really provided a certain basis for functioning of these temporary places of residence. It should provide protection for IDPs, and it should also help the owners of these residence places. If we talk about other ways to help the IDPs in terms of housing, we observe that part of them can get housing from the funds of temporary housing, which are formed on the ground. For instance, in their presentations of recent events, the Ministry of Reintegration mentioned about 768 of these objects of that type, where more than around 5,000 IDPs reside. Both last year and this year, we are turning to local authorities, to oblast authorities with the requests on informing about the state of forming such funds. But again, how many IDPs are on record to make sure they can get housing from such funds? And unfortunately, the picture which we're seeing, it's not optimistic. We have certain communities where placing people on record to get this housing from this fund, which is quite not yet started. there is a number of communities who have formed funds, but at the same time, with the number of persons on the record to receive, when it's coming more than 100, they have only 2-3 apartments to distribute. So the situation is not very much even, uniformal, but in some communities, they say that yes, they are engaging donors' funds for the reconstruction, repairs of the available objects, for the future placement of IDPs. And we can see that there are certain problems. On the one hand, passiveness of some local authorities who don't understand to which extent that IDPs can become a resource for them, the resource for community, for Hromada, because the legislation stipulates the setup of certain criteria on how to get housing, and some of these criteria can be really set up by the local authorities, and they could engage, for instance, persons of a certain profession, if necessary, doctors or other professionals, by prioritizing their queue in giving housing. Still, the main problem is the condition of these funds and the financial resources behind to make sure we would purchase, we would build or make renovations in the facilities to place IDPs. And it's important to mention that neither last year nor this year the state budget has had a necessary subsidy foreseen by Resolution 495 for the formation of funds of temporary housing. And once again, a lot of expectations is placed in connection with this on donors, charitable organizations, for forming such funds and for placement of IDPs to the extent possible. One other option is the housing fund of social purpose, based from the information from the Ministry of Reintegration, and it was mentioned quite numerously at the recent events. They don't have such objects too many, and more than 500 IDPs have already received the places of residence. On the one hand, we see processes of some new legislation coming in place. At the same time, we have this outdated fund of social purposes. And talking about IDPs, they refer that people have the right to receive housing from this fund. Only IDPs whose housing was destroyed on the territory of the anti-terroristic operation in the Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. So we can see that the norms of this legislation don't match to the situation which is in the state. Talking about other issues and other possibilities to provide internal displaced people with housing, we can separate several items. On the one hand, really, there are a lot of IDPs who are renting housing, and really our local teams say that these temporary housing centers have people who can't find jobs, are not able to provide themselves with enough funds, and are not able to rent housing. On the other hand, this could be the people with elderly age or for some other reasons who can't provide housing for themselves. On the other hand, those who rent housing, they're not enough protected in our state for the time being, because based on the data which is published even several years ago, a huge share of the rent market is in gray, and we have to really bring it back from this gray status in order to provide necessary protection to people. One more mechanism that could be used by internal displaced persons. I apologize, 2 minutes, and we move further because time-wise. Okay, briefly, just to finalize my one other mechanism is lending. Very important is the system of mortgage lending from the state youth housing using the funds of the Credit Institution for Recovery. This program has been around for several years, and the loans have been received by 669 families. And this program gives quite preferential conditions, such as 3% per annum and a small size of down payment. Also, we have also Ye Oselia that was mentioned today by other speakers. It's working. From the other hand, exactly for IDPs who are not in priority categories, the rate under this loan is going to be 7%. At the same time, in several oblasts, we know about Chernovetskaya Oblast, some local programs are adopted to compensate some percentage of per annum, which is to be paid by the IDPs. So we hope that we will have much more of such programs. And to finalize, one other very important mechanism that would really help a lot of IDPs to provide housing, it's definitely the mechanism of compensations. Let us recollect that it is quite limited and it's not including the ones whose housing was damaged or destroyed until February 2022, or if it was on the occupied territories. That's a huge drawback that is keeping a lot of people outside of the compensation. When it comes to newly occupied territories, the state is taking certain steps. Resolution 1145 regarding the experimental project of the remote observation of the destroyed houses with certain technical aids to make sure we can provide IDPs from these territories the possibility of receiving compensations. At the same time, this project is experimental since autumn last year, but to say that we have some final data, the Ministry Infrastructure has not yet published. We will be awaiting them because that's very crucial to make sure it's not experimental, but rather as general for all new occupied territories to provide at least part of the IDPs with the proper compensation. Many thanks. Many thanks, Anastasiia. The figures are impressive. 4.8 million people who need to be placed. That's all Ukrainian refugees who actually ended up in the developed European countries. So Ukraine faces a huge challenge. The state can't simply quickly provide. The local authorities can't provide everything quickly. So we are helped by volunteers, by people. Ukrainians stay together and they're doing with their own hands what the state can't do. So we have invited today two beautiful volunteers, Alyona and Daria, two organizations, brave to restore and to repair together, the ones who are doing the housing. So let's go by alphabet. Alyona, please could you tell us how you are doing it, what is working out well, what is not so good, how can you help the government? We started our organization in May 2022 after Kyiv Oblast was deoccupied. We started from some small repairs for the affected population. Roof, doors, windows, as well as clearing the rubbles, because we are missing the first step in the reconstruction. We first need to sort out the rubbles which are preventing this recovery and rebuilding. We were the ones who were helping to clear the rubble in Irpin. So there is a big question, a certain building, can it be renovated or not? So, but this first step was clearing the rubble. For 2 years, we thought that we will close this, but we're still sorting out and clearing the rubbles in Kyiv. Last week, we had 4 objects that we did clearance. We're permanently going to Bucha. Borodyanka we're simply not able to cover, but there are quite a lot of houses that were damaged that could be starting renovation. Private reconstruction starts from the point that we are clearing what was as a rubble, because when we have rubble, you can't place a modular home. These houses will simply not be part of this rebuilding programs. There is certain nuances. Secondly, people after us for 2 years, we are monitoring this permanently. Some of them started to renew their houses on the place where we have cleared the rubble. Volunteering, it really gives hope, it inspires, it really does away with these tragic memories, so people start to move forward in their lives. People, of course, want to be in their home, in their land, in their own garden. So that's the first idea. I think Daria will continue that. So what we have not, we don't have lists who we can help. So we have to search independently on our own. We have the platform VidnovyDim, where they collect objects so we can come over and clear the rubble. But when we come to the administration, we don't have the list who to help with clearing the rubble. And this story, we are ordering cars, we are taking out this rubbish. So in this cooperation about clearing rubble, we could seemingly gone over it and started with the renovation. And coming back to Mykola, allow me to quickly comment. I'm ready to leave my phone number. Please do it via me. You will have everything, all the contacts. Of course, we don't want to do it over your head. We don't want to use your personality. We want that system is working, the system that could be scaled up to other regions. Allow me to explain to you from my practice. We know that in our country we have decentralization. We have information that certain self-governance bodies are making individual decisions. But let's look straight. There are certain heads of local offices who, unfortunately, in my opinion, are not professional, let's put it mildly, and therefore you have certain aspects that you are talking about. For that, we need state military administration. That's why we need to coordinate this process, and we take a lot on ourselves. We don't need anything personally. When you have good intentions, good resources, when you want to help people, we also want to help people. Therefore, let us know that you are there. All contacts are open. Everybody will be helping you. And the list of objects that you're asking, we will certainly provide you. Unfortunately, that's how it's happening. That's life, that's reality. There should be somebody who would be coordinating. Yes, I understand. I'm just trying to voice the problem which we're facing. Good, thank you. We will be passing contacts of Mykola and Alyona. I can see people in chat are already agreeing on something. Yes, I will share your contacts from your experience. It's about recovery, e-renovation. We are talking to the people in the fields, and our people are receiving this. We're talking to some local organizations. A lot are in Kyiv. What are the problems with the e-restoration? It's normal that the problems are there, but I have to shed light because we can really cooperate. First of all, it's clear it's the absence or deficit of financing. Mykola said it very right. When you start to make renovation, something there is the uh, but the beam is rotten, so the cost estimate is going up and up. So especially when we talk about the vulnerable population, they simply don't have these funds to cover all these needs. In this restoration, they just give you the amount, like 75,000, for instance, and you can't ask for more. And then where the civil organizations are coming into the picture, grant programs, private donors from abroad, the diaspora who are ready to help, but they demand that we would understand what objects are there and which require which financing and how it will be. We don't have that mechanism for the time being. We wanted to start to discuss this mechanism because we talked a lot with the Ukrainians abroad. They are ready to collect from Europeans who really want to donate to the war. They are ready to collect money for the renovation. So they're ready to take this on, to show cases, cost estimates, local partners. So we are facing the problem that we don't know who has missed the money. So people really need to go over this winter because from this, the recovery restoration, it simply doesn't cover that. So very important who have found the apartment. I mean, it's very difficult for a old lady to even pass the information in DIA because we also have volunteer funds. They're ready to give legal advice and to bring this grandmother by their hand. Number 3 is clarification. Anton, somebody has started to renovate their house, and they say that you can only renovate with a certain construction company in this region. And they say, I'm doing it myself. I only need money for my construction materials. He didn't know that he could buy all the materials using this amount, not to buy it via a certain construction company. This third option is the deficit of contractors. There are big queues to get that. The question is, first, the work of contractors, their engagement. This is at the e-reservation. It's also the confidential. We're coming to the community. From the point of legislation, that's already a violation. We're closing our eyes, everybody understands that, but it comes out that 9, 10, 20 charitable organizations are coming to the community, they're getting lists, and they're starting their own monitoring. So we're coming to the object, and yes, and we get this, that you're number 10 who are coming over, and who nobody has helped. So people are demotivated because the local authorities is distributing this list. Everybody needs this assistance, but this process, it does require certain coordination on who and in which way we are regulating this, because we already have cases, although not from which organizations, that people represented themselves that they're from some famous organization, they took some advance payment, and there was some cases of fraud. People will start to take advantage of that because we are violating the legislation in a certain way. This is not, this requires really additional thinking and some certain details of IT solutions. We need to cooperate. The state sector needs to cooperate. The public sector needs to cooperate with the state to coordinate who we help. The money is available in the West. There are donors, there are private companies. Everything is a lot of that, but they require 3 main reasons. Cost estimate, local partner. These are the 3 points. The local partner, it's not the local organization, it's the organization, NGO, that is making obligation to prepare all the reports because they're necessary. These are my main points, and I really hope that we meet Mr. Mykola. I'm sorry that we don't have Max Nefedov, who is responsible for the big recovery portal, because in the framework of this portal, this coordination would be very much a plus. We have some critical data there and also object by object. So I believe that, yes, it will be worth returning to this. But for the time being, I would like to ask Daria about your experience. Is your experience same as Alyona's? Is it different? Maybe you want to add something. Welcome to everybody. Greetings. Yes, very close to what Alyona has been saying. Also, allow me to share my screen because I also wanted to show you. Allow me, how much time I have? Actually, 6:08. We have 20 minutes left, but I need some more time left for Q&A. So 5 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes. Okay, so I will shorten this. There is not that many slides. It's Repair Together. It's the NGO that is concentrated on build-up of the active volunteer support for our community. We are helping people how to help. Our biggest problem for the time being, it's actually the renovation. Since the beginning of May 2022, we also started, we went to Ягідне village, and from where our activity started in Chernihiv region, and we started from volunteering, then some door-to-door assistance, some small repairs, and once we received certain assistance from the media, from community, we already started to build housing because for many people this was they were living in some really old yarns. Okay, I will not stop at the results. I divided two types of activity, and in the end, I will also tell you about what the problems. The first year of activity, it was during Taloki, rave, and community. Every volunteer who was participating didn't have the experience. Then this expertise continued to scale up. So over 2 years, we have good experience. A lot of volunteers since the beginning of our foundation have become to work as team leads and they started to do constructions. Also, we faced in the first year with some gender biases at construction. They did not allow girls to construction. There was one lady, it's like a woman on the ship. She's not needed. So we introduced the project, which was called the huge construction by women. And this is supported by UNDP. And our community is already encompassing construction people. It's 50-50 men and women. And so slowly we are happy that we have the huge capacity of girls who also can, women who can also come over and become experts in production and be the construction leads. In the first year, we could mostly find the money through media. We were cooperating with IT, with Bur. We were able to quickly make up the frameworks, and the organizations would help us with some interior works. So that really helped us. So first 6 objects were started during the first year. Then we had some more difficult times, although there was a time of big development when the media and all the actors and artists who helped us. We stopped taking donations from Ukrainians. They have to support armed forces of Ukraine, so we moved to cooperate with other big organizations. We made the first international construction camp that took place during 4 months, 24/7. People were coming over from various countries, and we engaged more than 1,000 volunteers into this camp, out of which 200 were foreigners. And what mostly worked for us is the arrival of the international team lead from Ireland, who really optimized the construction. That is, the engagement of international expertise in construction is very important because that saved weeks of work. Over 1 year, in the second season, we were able to start new 10 facilities. This is what we had money for and our capacity as the community. And 5 houses were given to families to live in already. What else I wanted to mention, what we have for the time being? I wanted to invite you to our hub in Kyiv. Okay, in which situation we are? We have a huge community with experience of construction, but still this year we have had big problems with financing because we continue not to take donations from Ukrainians. We continue to engage international community, but big organizations on whom we counted and who promised to continue grants for financing change their strategy activity from recovery to other directions. Therefore, last months and previous months, with all 28 members of the team, we are engaged in filing grants and submitting grants, searching for financing. Also, it would be very nice to be engaged with our community where we could be useful and where we would not need to search for big money. For instance, if somebody is giving materials, construction materials, to people, and if they don't have funds to rebuild themselves, such organizations can come over that have the experience of recovery, and they can do this work free of charge. In such a way, we use the potential of big communities who are ready to give the assistance. From the other hand, this simplifies life to people and would more quickly render assistance to the people who have received funds for materials. I guess that's most important. Our plans include opening this year in the Chernihiv Oblast, in Lut, another camp, to finalize all the houses which we started. We also did some expertise in Kharkiv and in Sumy. We don't want to go to the front line. We don't want to do this. I think it's not safe, but within 30 kilometers to the front line, we could see a number of distractions, but very little we could find people who really need assistance. There are some villages who are absolutely empty. There are villages where locals say that only the Russian Duchess and we as the organization would be very happy to have somebody's mentorship, some people who could show to us where our capacity could be of interest and of most usefulness, because we're still wasting a lot of time to search, talking to the local authorities. Somebody says something is possible, some not. And we are as lonesome rabbits, we don't understand what to do, although the capacity is quite big and the experience is also quite sufficient. Thank you so much, Daria. I really hope that our next speaker will help us to understand high level where this experience is. As far as I know, we have, Denis has quite big data sets and you have a very good understanding. So Denis, please let us talk where it's necessary to have housing, to whom it's necessary, where are the people who need that. Thank you for the invitation. Allow me to briefly, but the overall situation with the housing market is as follows. Everybody needs housing, no matter what we would assume and imagine. People can't live under the open sky. They have to live somewhere. And the first, this is coming the reaction from the rent market. What we are seeing, it's plus minus stabilized over the last half a year, and the prices are not that fluctuating. The first, what is influencing the rent market is the migrational processes. People are moving, and where we have more people, the prices continue to rise. On average, the rent, the median price of the two-room apartment in Lviv would be 17,000 hryvnia. In Kyiv, 20,000 hryvnia. In Odessa, 9. In Kharkiv, 6.5. And in Kharkiv, it continues to decrease. If in general in Ukraine have stabilized, in Kyiv they're trying to grow slowly because more and more people are coming over to find better life, better job. In Kharkiv, for known reasons, unfortunately, the prices are decreasing because of the military shelling and because the people are moving out. I don't recommend to be based on one-room apartments because Lviv is the most expensive town, but it's mostly connected that in Lviv itself, the apartment stock for one-room apartments is not that huge, unlike Odessa, which is quite the touristic apartments for season. So in Odessa, they have quite a lot of one-room apartments. The second thing is where people are returning, where they're migrating. They're migrating to safe places, which is logical, but it's a mistake to think that they're migrating only to Western regions. To the Western regions, we can say that rich IDPs are migrating to the West, but on average, people are moving to the closest safe from the eastern to Dnipro, from Zaporizhzhia to Dnipro, from the south to Odessa region, to Kyiv outskirts. It's the medium class, and a significant number of Kyiv's outskirts are purchased by people. In our terminology, these are people in cars with not Kyiv plates. These are people from other regions. They're coming over to Kyiv. We saw that in 2014, 2015, and 16, when Bucha, Irpin, Gostomel were developing at the expense of IDPs, the people who first fled from the war, and it was very painful that they had to flee for the second time from the war, from destruction, from all of this grief. And as Mykola mentioned, the Kyiv Oblast has received too much, and in the spring of 2022, after the occupation, we photographed with all our force efforts all apartment houses of Bucha, Irpin, and Gostomel. 84 of such buildings had damages of various degree. So intact were just a quarter, and this is like huge, terrible destruction, and the recovery is still in progress. The next level where the housing is needed, it's when people started to receive the certificates from the restoration, and they're searching where to buy it. And they're facing the first disappointment that they have left to a safer place and they have come out to a more expensive place. So they have compensation for the previous housing, which is not enough in this region. So this has to be somehow also solved by some educational process. We understand that the limit of the budget is very strict, but this question is here, how to explain to people where they can financially afford to buy this housing. The second problem with certificates of e-restoration, what we are seeing, it's what the first response is coming from what we call the economically active population, people who understand how to basically buy housing. But again, this grandmother who has received this certificate, she doesn't know. She built her house together with her husband some 60 years ago. She doesn't know what to do with this certificate. Her children and grandchildren are in Europe, so she is at a loss. She can't buy, she can't rent, and this process also needs to be launched and to continue. The third component of the complexity where to buy housing, if in 2021 we had on the market of Ukraine 325,000 buy and sells, in 2022 it was only 100,000, but in 2023 172,000. We see this trend this year. People are buying housing for themselves, but people don't want to buy outdated housing. And by various estimates, from 80 to 90 plus percent of the housing stock is our Soviet heritage, which the apartment houses that need to be renovated, they have really poor levels of energy efficiency, so people want to buy new housing. It is purchased much less for various reasons, from the point that investors are not ready to give money at early stage. The costs of materials, of workforce has grown, and the prices for new housing continue to rise. In Lviv, the ready housing grew by 7%, in USD by 9% grew, in Kharkiv decreased by 5% in USD. And this is a request for sales. We don't know what would be the real number of agreements. In Ukraine, paradoxically as it may seem, it continues to rise. The demand for new high-quality housing is there. Separately, I would like to say that there is access to barrier-free, even for people who have no problem with health. The people understand that anything can happen, and they want to avoid the situation if they are closed in their apartments. Thank you, Denis. Maybe one few words. If not, then I am coming to Q&A. Very briefly. eOselya is a beautiful program. It's relaunching the market. We don't need any assistance. eOselya needs assistance in terms of engaging capital from budget or non-budget so that more people could use such a program because it's really working well. Thank you. The question is to Denis. from the chat. I liked this question in the context of this old housing stock. Are there any initiatives to finalize some housing complexes which were not finalized before the big war? No, none. None of such initiatives. Mykola, maybe you know that you have heard something in Kyiv region. Initiatives on bringing, continuing the conserved housing. We don't do this at the expense of the budget. We have some projects with international colleagues. They are helping us with this. Engaged. Who should people come to municipalities to United 24? So this potentially frozen newly constructed buildings could become a good solution. This could be interesting for private investors. So Mykola and Denise, people who are working with the private sector. Yeah, that's very much interesting for private investors. It has to be clear in terms of documentation. We actually now looking at two objects. I don't want to say out loud. It's the whole housing complex that we could buy out and to finalize them and make them available for IDPs. That's in the Kyiv region. So we do have such options. This information is with the local self-governance bodies. We do know about it. So investors, if they want to invest in housing in Kyiv Oblast, they would like to come over to Mykola Boyko and to ask where they can actually buy incomplete housing. First of all, to local governance offices, but yes, you're always welcome. I would also like to mention that the average indicator to return to construction, it's 75%. In the western regions, it's more than 90%. So suffering is the east, south, and surprisingly, Kyiv Oblast, only 5% of the developers returned, and they are building with much lower pace. In terms of engaging private capital, it's been difficult for developers these days. They're not engaging any new sites. If we talk about the engagement of international capital, we are waiting for somebody systematic, after whom we are waiting. And systematic are waiting for the stabilization of the line front and the certainty what will be happening with the war in some more long-term format. For them, the military risks are too high. Of course, we can understand them. One last question I want to ask to Oleksandra Betliy. The question is about registration for the event. If we had the representative with the Ministry of Restoration, they would also reply from the point of view of the policy, but we also can have our own opinion what to do to make sure that the restoration would become accessible to the citizens of Ukraine whose real estate is on the occupied territory or on the territory where we still have active hostilities, especially in terms of settlements which are fully destroyed, such as Bakhmut, Mariivka. We touched base on this topic several times. Alexandra, do you see any vision how the state policy could be regarding the state policy and about the compensation of the housing on the occupied areas? To my knowledge, there are discussions to make sure we can solve this question. And the biggest problem is that the certificates are given considering which kind of housing people have had. So people who have come from the temporarily occupied territories, there is no possibility to confirm the housing, its condition, what was the apartment. So very often we don't have this single register where this could be described. We simply don't have that. That's a big problem just to support the ownership, to get the certificate is quite complicated. So unfortunately, we can only state that, and the second question, that the money is missing, actually really little money for this program compared to what I have already shown regarding certificates. 12,000 applications are still in, and it's basically not far from those who have this right, but finance much smaller amount. So it's a comprehensive question. So I believe that the way out would be is to move to social housing. And these projects, as Mr. Mykola says, when they will buy out separate housing complexes, they will finalize them where they would place IDPs. That's a good solution. Same programs about modular housing. So far, unfortunately, we can't deal with it in a very comprehensive manner. When we talk about the certificates, we're talking only about the certificates to buy new housing. That's where we don't have money yet. So this project on social housing, something that I talked about, these programs where private people are coming over, that's our way out. But again, that requires more money. And Maria, if possible, two questions which were in the chat regarding the project. The principles of reconstruction, it's not there yet in the open space. And regarding the law on social housing, which was recollected in the beginning, once again, there was the law, but there was no financing for social housing. This is again about the change of paradigm of the housing policy, because the multi-kid people, multi-kid families had that, IDPs had that. There are certain conditions that people need to match. So this housing is transferred to ownership. That's why we don't have the social housing. Many thanks, Oleksandra. Many thanks to everybody who has become a part of this. Daria, please check up some questions in the chat. Daria, please say yes. So he has left his phone. So please stay in touch with them. Many thanks to our partners, to the European Union, who has made it possible such discussion on a monthly basis, the implementation of the project of control of expenditures for recovery, as well as the development of our portal and the monitoring. We hope that there will be less and less destruction in the future, and the recovery will be good and effective. Many thanks to everybody for joining us. See you next month. Thank you very much. Goodbye.